Hola, I'm Jorge Ramos.
And I'm Paola Ramos.
And this is The Moment. Today, Paola, we're going to be talking about the war in Iran, the hopelessness for a quick solution, and the long-term consequences for the rest of the world. That means consequences for you and for me.
You know, there's a lot going on in the news, and I can understand that it's overwhelming to try and keep up with everything. So let me try and give you just a quick recap of the latest. So over the weekend, the U.S. and Iran diplomatic talks failed. We also now have a Trump administration that is blockading the Strait of Hormuz. Also, in between all of this, you have an Iranian regime feeling triumphant. Of course, we also have to mention that over 3,000 people have been killed in Iran since the beginning of this war. And check this out. Just last week, the Israeli government did airstrikes in Lebanon, killing 300 people in just one day. But today we want to do something different. Today we don't necessarily want to focus on the numbers, on the breaking news, on what you may be hearing in cable news. We want to talk to you about the human side of this war, what it means to be covering Iran from within the country. But more than anything, we want to understand what the Iranian people are feeling in this moment, caught between these impossible scenarios, right? On the one hand, they're trying to liberate themselves from this repressive regime. And on the other hand, they're also trying to do the same thing, liberate themselves from an American military intervention. And so the question is, Dad, right? Like, how do they find hope in this moment?
It's almost an impossible proposition, Paola. So for this, one of our guests today is Catalina Gómez Ángel, a longtime war correspondent, who is one of the few voices, this is important, one of the few voices actually reporting from within Iran. And the tragedy and the beauty of this, Paola, is that sometimes Catalina is reporting from her own windows.
We're so lucky to be able to talk to her, and also to Yeganeh Torbati. She's a New York Times correspondent based in Istanbul in Turkey. And she's been covering Iran on and off for approximately 15 years. So we're also very lucky to talk to her. I also have to mention that she's one of the authors of her upcoming book titled Stolen Revolution, Betrayal and Hope in Modern Iran. It comes out this summer, and we can't wait to read it.
So watch this episode of The Moment on our new YouTube channel and our conversation about the war in Iran cuando regresemos. Hola, Catalina, and welcome to The Moment.
Thank you.
Welcome,
Thank you very
Catalina.
much.
It's great to talk to you. So you are one of the few foreign correspondents working right now in Iran, and obviously it is incredibly difficult and dangerous. So we wanted to talk to you because we want to find out, what is it that you are seeing that we are not seeing? How is it to live in Iran right now?
Basically, the difficulty for people abroad to see is because the internet is cut. The reason we are having this conversation is because journalists who are based in this country have an open internet, like also some authorities and politicians. Then this is a very rare compared with the possibilities for the rest of the Iranians who are absolutely incommunicated with the war, or you just have to pay for VPN that is very expensive these days. What you are seeing is a society who is in very confused, especially after this ceasefire, when they really stop, try to understand what happened, and now they are confronting the situation in the country, the economic crisis that is going to be worse, many people losing their jobs, asking the question, what will be the reaction of this system? Is going to be more repressive? Is going to what is they are going to confront? And I have seen that people now it's in a really difficult situation after these almost 40 days of attacks. Now they are starting to understand that what is coming next is worse.
Is it dangerous for you, Catalina, to go outside right now? Or are you being followed? Is there some kind of censorship?
No. We have very limited places where we can go that has been attacked. For example, it's not that you can go to any place that has been attacked. You need a special permission. And if you want to film in the streets, actually these days I find it even easier than in a normal times, because there is a lot of police in the street. Then you negotiate with them and ask permission for shooting. In other occasions, it's more difficult because you never know where the intelligence guys are, and they will come to ask you for permission. Then actually these days, is even easier to film in special places. But no, we are not followed. At least we don't know that. But we need to have a permission for every place we go. And if we want to move outside of Tehran, it's basically impossible. We request so many times to go to Minab or to go to Isfahan or the places who have been heavily attacked, but so far we haven't received a yes.
But you get the sense that the same government is still ruling. In other words, who's in charge in Iran right now?
I mean, the same system is running.
Same system.
The faces are different, probably some of them, and we don't know how is the dynamics working these days, especially because Galibaf, Mohad Bagher Galibaf, the Speaker of the Parliament, suddenly came in a really, really, really important position that he really didn't have. And he's not really the most, let's say, the most famous among the most radicals. He used to be a conservative radical, but not extremist radical. Actually, the people who are in the street following the system in all these demonstrations and with the flags, they are not really happy with Galibaf. Then you start asking questions: who is really supporting him? Who is behind him? Which is the roles of not just the Revolutionary Guards. Who are the Revolutionary Guards who are having more control right now? Then still there are many things that are not clear, but the system is the same, the justice is the same, and basically we have the same, the president is the same.
Catalina, you mentioned that people are feeling a lot of confusion, right? That there's even this question of, is the worst yet to come? And I'm wondering how people are feeling after the recent breakdown of the diplomatic talks between Vice President J.D. Vance and Iran. How are people interpreting that on the ground?
People didn't have any hope about these conversations. Remember that?
None. So they weren't even...
No. I mean, something could have, but remember that to negotiate the nuclear agreement in 2015 with Obama's government took almost 2 years.
Right.
It's very complicated to negotiate, especially the nuclear file. Then how in one day they were going to negotiate? People, were having the hopes that the relations were going to be a little bit better, but really was not a really big expectation. But people were afraid that if the conversations break in a very bad way, that was going to come back a new attacks. And people were afraid today when Donald Trump announced the new blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. People were very tense. So far, nothing had happened. But most of the people are almost sure that the war hasn't finished, that the new attacks are coming. This is the reality.
How do you interpret, Catalina, the sudden blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, right? This is, of course, something that he's been claiming that he wants open. Now, suddenly the Trump administration is attempting to blockade it. What do you make of that?
I think what he is doing, the blockade is just for these vessels and these ships that they are coming from Iranian ports or coast. And basically what they are trying to stop is Iran exporting oil, petrochemics, metals, and everything, and also the imports to Iran, and also to stop these ships that they are paying these famous tolls, because they are closing this route that they open by the continent between the Larak Island, that is the closest Iranian island to the Strait of Hormuz. And they are trying to open the other open corridor, is what they say they are trying to do. But right. Basically, Iran was very clear in saying that if they see military vessels around the Strait of Hormuz, they are going to attack and the ceasefire is finished. And I think they are ready, because I think the Iranians are ready to continue. They feel that they don't lose anything.
You think they would attack the United States?
Yeah, if they say if there is a military vessels navigating around, they will destroy it and the ceasefire is finished.
So Catalina, just late last year, you were reporting something completely different. You were reporting about protests and how the government killed and arrested thousands of people. We'll never know the exact number. I still remember when President Trump announced the attack on Iran, he was asking Iranians to rebel against the government. So my question is, how do people feel about the present regime?
Jorge, one of the girls, because the young people is the most traumatized what happening in January. When I asked her what she think about the war, she told me the the nightmare, we already live in hell. What we saw in January was hell. Then whatever we live in this war is nothing compared what we live in in January. Then the Iranians are, especially the young generation, this middle class who really broke with the system long time ago. They are really, 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 really traumatized. They are lost. They don't have any hope. And actually, they had some hope at the beginning of this war that these attacks will bring any change, especially when they saw that Supreme Leader was killed. They saw probably there is a door for change. Now they are absolutely convinced that this is not going to be the way. Actually, many of them came against this war because they saw how the civilians and the country has been destroyed, and probably Netanyahu, not Trump, care about the Iranian people. They just care about their own interests. But this is a country under they are lost. The society is losing hope. They didn't have hope before. They got a little hope in January, and now they are in a really bad situation. But I see, especially, and I repeat, the young people. The young people are like, what is going to happen with us in the future?
So no regime change, no possibility of regime change.
They don't see it for the moment, Jorge, because after this killing in January, people don't feel that they have the power to go back, and they don't want to lose their life for nothing. And you have to understand that since the beginning of the war, there is a lot of checkpoints in the street. There is a lot of militaries. There is a lot of threats from the justice system. They are starting to execute so many people related with this protest. Then people are afraid, and people don't find each other the opportunity. Another thing that the system did was to take the control of the streets. Since the day one, thousands of people are going every night or even during the day to the main squares, to the main streets to support the system. Then there is no opportunity for other people to get together. Then many people believe that probably this opportunity could be after the war, when the people don't have money, people start getting very angry, losing their jobs, and could be the option. But at this moment, nobody. And I will tell you something. Today I was walking in the main street of Tehran, in one of the main, Revolution, and many people didn't want to talk to me. I didn't have a camera, I didn't have a microphone. I say, yes, it's for a newspaper. And people are afraid, like never before.
I'm curious though, because when we're looking at Iran from the outside, from afar, it seems like there has been some type of narrative shift. A couple of weeks ago, we were talking about a regime, about an Iranian regime that was killing its own people. And now the narrative obviously is focusing on a United States government that is killing Iranians, right? That is killing folks in the Middle East. Do you sense that narrative shift on the ground, and how is it playing out at all?
In some people, yes. In some people, really, yes. And some people are really, really sad of what is happening because for the civilians, because the attacks are so intense that they don't care how many civilians infrastructure is destroyed and how many people died around. Even like that, we have to always put in perspective. I'm not saying it's the number of people who they recognize that people died in January was 3,117 people that the system recognized. Other organizations goes up to 7,000 and more. And now there are around civilians, the same organization is saying around 1,600. But the destructions, the damage, the pain of the people makes that many people move this narrative. And people are against the war. But as I was telling at the beginning, now that the war stopped, people are starting to to think in a different way. Iranians are very interesting because it's not that you can say today what they think and tomorrow you can keep saying what they think. They never think the same. Every week, sometimes you will find a different kind of. That's why it's very interesting and very difficult country to cover because it's very emotional and opinions change very quickly.
And especially if they're scared of talking, I was going to say, right? And also when there's no public surveys or in polling. So it is, I can't imagine, of course.
Yeah. It's very interesting for me today. I think I never faced this amount of fear I've been here for many, many years and in difficult situations, but not like today.
So Catalina, I want to get your sense on how Iranians are feeling about the war. If you listen to Donald Trump, he says that the United States won the war. If you listen to the Iranian regime, they say they won the war. So I wonder what's the perception within the country. Who people believe? Are they, obviously they're listening to official television. Are they buying that? Or they truly know what has happened to the Navy, to the Air Force, to their soldiers?
I mean, I always say that these are two parallel countries. You have the population who really support the system, who really is in the streets supporting them. We always say that it's around 20%, let's say between 15, 18 million people. That is a lot. This is a 90 million population country. Then it's a lot. And these people are convinced that they are the winners, of course. And these people are even ready to continue. They don't want this war to stop. They don't want the ceasefire. They don't want the negotiations, and they want to continue to the victory. When you ask them what is the victory, they will tell you the victory is when the Americans go from this region, the bases are not around, and Iran doesn't have any threat. For them, this is victory. Then you have the other 80% of the population, that is the people who broke with the system. You have many different opinions among these people. Some of these people really believe that Iran is a victory because they believe that they have been attacked by the two most powerful armies in the war, basically, or one of the most, including Israelis, and they have survived. The country is still holding, and Iranians were able to attack Israel, the countries in the regions, and to keep surprising them with the missiles, and is still holding. That they have the line, for example, we didn't face any lack of anything during these 40 days of war. Then they have these emergency lines. They knew how to respond. And for so many people, even against the system, they are surprised by the way this system reacted. Because, there is a lot of mismanagement and a lot of criticism to this same system that doesn't know how to answer to the questions and to the problems to this population. But during the war, they knew how to do it. They knew how to respond. Then for people, some people are really surprised and say, okay, they managed to do it. Of course, another people don't buy it. They know that they are fighting for their survival. Then they lost a lot, but they don't care because their victory for the system is to survive. And they did. Then it depends who you talk. But the Iranians, many of them are really surprised that they have managed to resist during 40 days.
I'm curious from where you stand, Catalina, what you think Western media is getting wrong in terms of the coverage. What is it that we may be missing from here?
No, I don't think it's missing because it's very difficult for the international media to have communication with the people inside.
Yeah.
But the people inside who communicate with the international media is more or less the same people. These middle, educated, young people, opposite of the system, who knows how to have VPN, who has the money to buy the VPN. Still, you need to go to the street to understand more variety, more different kind of opinions, changing the opinions. Because sometimes I see that these people I listen in the medias, I see here about CNN, BBC, or Al Jazeera that we can watch here by parabolic because it's illegal, but we use. Sometimes it's the same. We need to go more to the street, but these other people are not connected with the war to tell what is going on.
Catalina, we're really privileged to have the chance to talk to you.
Yeah.
And before we let you go, you said in a recent interview in Spanish, creo que puede haber un mundo en paz, pero no sé si me vaya a tocar verlo. I think there could be peace in the world, but I'm not sure if I'm gonna be a witness to that. So, are you still hopeful about us, human beings, when you're covering, I don't know how many wars, and now you're in the middle of another one?
No, today when I woke up and I saw that Viktor Orbán has lost the elections in Hungary, I was happy and I say, okay, there is a hope.
That's a change. That's a change, of course.
hope,
Yeah,
yeah.
things
Yes.
are changing, right? Yeah.
I think human beings, we have to believe in ourselves, and we have to believe that we ourselves can change things. And that's why, even with the old problems of democracy, I believe that this is the way we have. And also, every time here in Iran, I see, for example, look, we go to the street now without bail. I put it when I have to work because it's official and I meet. But now, these days, even in the middle of the war, the street full of police, the streets of Tehran are full of girls without not even with the scarf on and this is a victory of them. Nobody gave it to them. Nobody offered. They just won it. They pay a lot with life. They pay with prison. They pay with so big price, but they won this space. Then I think we still can have these victories, and I still have some hope when I see them.
Catalina, thank you so much. Muchas gracias. It's really a privilege to talk to you.
A ustedes.
Eres
you
muy
for what you're
valiente.
doing.
Muy valiente.
No, por favor, no es tan difícil, de verdad que,
Creo que lo es.
you know.
Gracias, Catalina.
Sí, es
Chao.
valiente, sí.
Bye.
Okay, so we continue our conversation about the war in Iran. And now joining us is Yeganeh Torbati, a New York Times correspondent who's been covering Iran for about 15 years. Yeganeh, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to The Moment.
Thanks so much for having me. And just to clarify, I've sort of been covering it on and off. So there's been a lot of other things I've covered in between there. But
We know you
yeah.
cover many things, of course, of course. No, but we're grateful for your time.
Exactly.
Thank you so much.
So we're speaking on Monday after the collapse of the direct negotiations between Iran and the United States over the weekend. What are you hearing? What are your sources around the region telling you? Is there any insight? Is hope lost?
I mean, it was always quite a big ask. You know, the last time that the U.S. and Iran reached a nuclear deal, it took months and months, over a year of negotiations, and that occurred between Iran and the Obama administration back in 2015. So the idea that, these talks were, even within the span of 2 weeks, much less a day, going to lead to agreements on a really thorny set of issues that have kind of been at the heart of the conflict between Iran and the U.S. for years, always seemed a bit far-fetched to observers, to people who kind of know the region and know Iran well. And so I think, that's what we saw on Saturday, which was, despite, the talks went on for a long time, 21 hours. There really weren't very many leaks as to what was happening, which was, in terms of how the talks were going, somewhat of an encouraging sign. It meant that they were quite substantive, I think. But in the end of the day, they weren't able to get to a final commitment or agreement. And I think that, I would have been quite surprised if they had, simply because not only were all those issues kind of still there, but also there's all this greater amount of bitterness and conflict now, because there's been such a drastic war happening over the course of 5 weeks. So we can get into all of that, but it's we still don't know. We've got some more time left on this ceasefire. Maybe it'll be extended. There will be chances for other negotiations, perhaps. But that's kind of where we stand right now.
Yeah, so do you think that the U.S. underestimated Iran? I was talking to an American ambassador this morning, and he was telling me that what happened in Venezuela, in which they were able to extract Nicolas Maduro and just have some sort of a happy ending, was really a terrible example for Iran, because maybe President Trump thought it was going to be that easy, and clearly 6 weeks later we know it's completely different.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not super familiar with the Venezuelan regime and the ideology that kind of underpins it, and how embedded it is sort of within either society or within throughout the government. So, I know Iran well, and the Iranian government, the ideology that it has, it's very much built on this idea of resistance and of kind of standing up against, especially the United States and Israel. And so the idea that they would be able to take out one person at the top, and then his successor, whoever might be a successor, would simply capitulate. For those who know Iran, seems a bit far-fetched. And so, and it's a regime that has invested millions of dollars each year in ideology, and in sort of ideology, not just in terms of propaganda to the public, but also in universities that the military goes to, or its own ideological institutions. It's very embedded throughout Iranian society. Every public and even large private institution in Iran has it's kind of seeded with intelligence agents, people who kind of connect the regime to the major organs of society. And, they are very good at kind of being able both to repress and also sort of, I don't know, engage with society in a way that makes it a much more kind of rooted regime. And that's not to say that it's popular, but just that it is deeply embedded in society. And so it's not something that necessarily with one strike, they would fall.
Yeah.
It's a very complex regime and kind of thing to deal with and understand.
Right. Maybe they're thinking about that now, after the fact. When you turn on TV, I'm talking to you from LA today, but you turn on cable news, and as you know, everyone is covering the way in which Americans are feeling the economic impact of this war. Just a couple of hours ago, I saw a report about American farmers and how they're dealing with the rising costs of fuel. I'm curious, from where you stand in Turkey, how are people feeling the economic impacts of the war in Turkey?
Well, Turkey is a country that, I don't cover it, so I don't want to kind of speak too much about it. It had already been dealing with rising prices, so I think that's been an issue, kind of longstanding, and something that, the government's been trying to address. But I think, the remarkable thing about this war in particular is that it has had such a global impact. My colleagues have written stories about how, I think it was in the Philippines, they've been asked to take shorter showers, and, impacts in South Korea, especially East Asia. They're feeling a lot with the reduction in natural gas supplies and damage to these major natural gas fields. And so that has been a piece of leverage that Iran has discovered that it has. It has threatened to close this vital passageway for oil transit, the Strait of Hormuz, for years, for decades. I remember covering Iran as a Reuters reporter in Dubai in like 2012, 2013. And, some Revolutionary Guard general would make that threat. And, you kind of hear the same threat over and over. You kind of roll your eyes as a reporter sometimes. But they really did it. And I think they proved to the world that this is a viable threat that they can make. And now that's knowledge that they will have forever. And so, the world that we live in now is a different one in that way from the world that we lived in, February 27th, before these attacks started. And so, a lot of the countries that are being affected are democratic countries. They are accountable to their populations, including in the United States. And that's something that President Trump has to worry about, and the Republicans have to worry about. And Iran doesn't have that. It's not, the regime is not worried about being ousted in the next election, or what the damage that this war is doing domestically might do. But that is a piece of leverage that it has over its enemies or its adversaries in this war.
Yeah. So I want to ask you about the image of the president of the United States in Iran and in the region. As you know, the image of the president is linked completely to the image of the United States, and especially after Donald Trump threatened to destroy Persian civilization. And just today, he published an AI-generated image of himself as Jesus Christ. So how is he being seen over there? And how is the prestige of the United States linked to that image?
Yeah, I mean, it's been months now that I think if you're a reporter on Iran or if you're covering Iran, one sentiment that you hear, not all the time for sure, but often enough that it's striking, and it feels at least somewhat representative, is that I think people inside the country had gotten to a point, especially by June of last year when the 12-day war happened, that they felt like, we've tried everything to get rid of this government. We've voted in elections where we tried, to have reform. That those reform movements were crushed, in the 1990s and 2000s. We've protested peacefully, and those protest movements were crushed. And I think a lot of people had reached a point where they felt like some sort of intervention by the United States and or Israel is kind of the only thing that would lead to the ousting of this government and therefore, in their view, a better future for Iran. There's a lot of critiques that can be made of that perspective, and I fully kind of caveat that with the fact that the people who are willing to kind of speak to a Western reporter may have certain views that are not necessarily fully weighted, and it's not as representative as a scientific poll, but that is something that I heard a lot. And if you read other people's reporting, they have kind of those views have surfaced as well. And we saw that again in especially January. I mean, January saw these mass protests in Iran, the biggest since 2009. And they were crushed with a brutality that we really have not seen in the modern era in Iran. And numbers are disputed. We're not able to operate on the ground safely as journalists, so it's really hard to know exactly how many. But by even the most modest measures, we're talking about 7,000 people killed. That's what one reputable human rights organization says. So I think that created an immense rage and desperation amongst the population, and a significant number of people. I can't tell you if it's the majority or not, but a significant number of people thought that some sort of military intervention by President Trump, who, of course, promised this. He promised that Iranian protesters that he would support them and, in a way, protect them. That kind of intervention might save them in some way. And so when these attacks happened, I think a good number of people were waiting for that. And I think as the weeks went on, and especially when civilian infrastructure began to be hit, and when the rhetoric that we saw from President Trump, of course, makes its way to Iran immediately, and people hear about it very quickly, that I've noticed, sources that I have that supported some kind of military intervention in January or last June are tired of this war now, and they've lost hope in it. And it's very complicated, right? There are people who, in some ways, support the regime, but then now that they're not support the regime, but we're anti-war. But now that the war has happened, they're like, well, if we're going to pay this price, just go all the way and get rid of the government.
You reported in that too, right? Like the hardliners that are to this day saying, no ceasefire, right? Keep going.
Well, there's that, but kind of what I was referring to is people who were originally anti-war, but now that the war has happened, they're anti-war and anti-regime. Now that the war has happened, they're like, well, just kind of go for it and, get rid of them. It's just a very complicated society where there's just been a lot of tumult over the past 10, 15, 20 years. But I do think that, the rhetoric that President Trump has used, I mean, even the most anti-regime Iranian is extremely proud of their civilization and is extremely proud of this legacy of, stretching back 5,000 years of continuous kind of one sort of continuous people with just all these kinds of different conquests and empires and things that this very rich culture that Iranians are the heirs of, really. And so to say that a whole civilization would be, would disappear, never to come back, that I think people found not only disturbing as in like very frightening, but also kind of made people lose hope in this idea. And many of them already had, I think, with the attacks on infrastructure. So the sense overwhelmingly that I have right now from sources when I speak to them, and there are exceptions to this, but is just this kind of despondency and fear. And people feel like, okay, now we kind of have the worst of both worlds. For those who are against the regime, they feel like, okay, these people are still in power. Khamenei's son, the supreme leader's son, has now ascended. Um, eh, and they're executing. There's been a string of executions the last few weeks. There's no sign of them kind of letting up on repression. And our, the coffee shop that I go to, or my home, or the bridge that I take to work, or whatever, is destroyed, and my life is harder, and the economy is worse. And I think people are really in a bad emotional and mental state right now.
Do you think the regime feels like they have the momentum right now?
I think they feel that way. I think they feel that, we survived and therefore we won.
Right.
The bar was always much lower for them. It's like, as long as there's still an Islamic Republic in place and they maintain control of the country, that to them is a win. These wars, these conflicts have really long tails. So I think in 10 years, in 20 years, we'll know what the true impact of this was. Maybe this was the thing that, led to a kind of domino effect. And in 5 years, there won't be an Islamic Republic, and who knows what'll be in its place. It's extremely hard to tell at this point. But at this very moment, they, to me, read as quite confident. Especially, I think the Strait of Hormuz is like an unbelievable leverage point for them. Analysts have told me more leverage than the nuclear program ever was. And so I think they're going to be, having that card with them whenever they go into any negotiation from now on.
Yeah, so before the war, many people thought that places, and you just mentioned Dubai or Saudi Arabia, people thought that they were safe, but not anymore. Obviously, Iran has been attacking its neighbors. So in the long term, how's the Middle East been affected by this war? And it's being affected as we speak.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dubai especially was always kind of seen as this like a sort of a counterpoint to Iran, right? Like this was what you could be in the Middle East if you used your oil revenues to establish new connections and to invest in other industries. Whereas Iran kind of, at the very same time that Dubai was kind of becoming a global powerhouse, and I was living there in 2013, 14 or so. Iran was sinking into Ahmadinejad was in power a little bit before that. There were round after round of sanctions. Iran was really suffering quite a lot. And Dubai kind of got out ahead and established this model. But that is looking much more vulnerable now. I think there were a lot of red lines that were crossed in terms of, it was unthinkable to me 3 months ago that Iran would be hitting Dubai hotels or facilities in Saudi. Saudi and Iran signed a kind of like a sort of pact, like a cooperation pact or something in 2023 that was brokered by China.
Just broke, yeah.
Yeah, they were in kind of the best relations that they had in many years, and that's gone now. So I think that's going to have major implications for Iran itself, and also I think for the region. I don't know if you're HSBC and you're thinking about where to send your, several thousand employees in the region, where do you send them? On the other hand, it is a very strategically, like Dubai and that kind of the Gulf area is very strategically located. If you want easier access to Asia and Africa and the Middle East, like there's not that many other places you can go. But that kind of barrier has been broken now, and it's not kind of the haven that it once was thought of being.
You've been covering these dynamics for many years at this point. What from what you've covered, from what you know, what way do you see out of this war? Or is it just another cyclical?
Yeah, it's hard to make predictions, and I try to avoid it because I don't want people to use my words against me in 5 years. But, I think it's very conceivable that what we see is maybe not an official return to the war, but sort of maybe we get like, the 12-day war in June, there was never actually a formal ceasefire. Like nothing was signed. It was just kind of like verbal, and it was very shaky at first, and then it kind of like solidified, and we didn't see direct attacks after that. I think, this could go in a similar direction where, maybe both sides just decide, or all three sides decide that for now the costs are too high for everyone to keep this going. And so they stop for now. But it's hard for me to believe that that status quo will hold. It just seems quite untenable. Either Iran decides to try to start rebuilding its missile stocks. That seems very likely. Maybe trying to go for a nuclear weapon. That seems quite unclear right now if that's going to happen or not. But especially with the missiles, I mean, especially before this war started, Israel was signaling that it actually saw Iran's ballistic missile stockpile as a greater threat to it than even the prospect of a nuclear weapon. And so if Iran starts rebuilding those, and it's very obvious that the U.S. and Israel have the ability to kind of pick up on that pretty quickly, then I don't see how there's not more strikes on Iran at some point. Maybe they're pinpoint strikes, maybe they're just limited, and they kind of like do this periodically. That seems to me a fairly likely scenario. Of course, I try to keep an open mind. Anything could happen. I've been surprised and shocked like more times than I can count in the last year at sort of the turn of events. But if there's a deal, it would be surprising to me that, there were the U.S. and Iran were in the fifth or about to have the sixth round of negotiations back in June when Israel struck. And they hadn't, my understanding is that those talks were not progressing. Now, maybe with the fact that the military strikes have happened and Iran knows that that's a possibility for it, maybe they'll be more willing to compromise. Maybe President Trump will sort of come down from his red lines in terms of no enrichment on Iranian soil. We don't really know, but that's always a possibility that they reach some kind of deal that, allows this relationship to kind of go into a new phase. I do think it's notable that the vice president of the United States and the Speaker of Parliament, who is really kind of, that's his formal role, but he's playing a very important role in terms of running the country and running the war. Like they met face to face, highest level contact since the revolution. It's very possible that that momentum kind of carries forward and Iran is able to have kind of a more functional relationship with the United States. There's a wide range of possibilities, but I think the first scenario that I outline is probably the more likely one in terms of this kind of like uneasy stasis with like periodic bouts of conflict.
So we have one final question. I know that you have an upcoming book set for release in the summer. Congratulations. It's called Stolen Revolution, Betrayal and Hope in Modern Iran. It's based on the stories of 6 Iranians. I'm not sure if your publisher will let you do this, but is there anything that at this point you might want to change in that book?
What an awful question, Dad. With all the time that you have. Yeah.
We were able to get the 12-day war in there in the epilogue. And, you all might know, like, the publishing industry and process is it's not like the newspaper reporting strict. Where, there's just a lot of moving pieces and all that. And we sort of felt like, we considered very briefly, is there any way we could get in the January protests? And then we assessed at that point that, like things are likely going to change a lot. Even after this, so trying to put this in at the last minute, maybe it still won't feel relevant.
It would never stop.
Yeah, and then that was a correct assessment because like 6 weeks later, this war started, and there's no way now with the June 2nd publishing date that we would be able to fit this in. But I do think that overall, book explains kind of maybe how we got here. And we don't really focus a ton on US foreign policy. It's very much focused on Iran and Iran's evolution over the last 47 years. And in particular, kind of how it started out, this revolution kind of with hopes for social justice, with hopes for some kind of actually, democracy and equality, and how very quickly that was kind of hijacked by one particular faction or group. And even over time, how within the Islamic Republic that formed, the military and other entities very close to the supreme leader took over a greater and greater share of power and of the economy in particular. And I think the process that we've seen play out after this war, with even greater power for the Revolutionary Guards, is sort of a continuation of that. But this book, I think, really explains, how did Iran get to the point that it was at on February 27th? What factors explains this, and who are the people who tried to fight against that? Who are the people who acquiesced? And in general, kind of what is the spirit of Iranians? I think this book really brings that to the fore.
Thank you so much for talking to us. We really appreciate it. We need to understand exactly what's happening. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you
We
both
can't
for
wait to
having
read
me.
your book.
All right.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, I feel like we learned a lot, Dad. I think it's
It was heavy, right? It felt so heavy with so much information. And that's how it feels in wars.
Exactly. And, it's hard to keep up with everything the administration is doing. Obviously, the news is overwhelming. Things are changing from day to night. And so I think it was extremely helpful. But as both of them were talking, of course, I went back to my childhood and those days where you would just pick up and go to wars. No? Obviously, it was a different part of your career. And I was actually asking myself, if you could, today, would you go to Tehran to cover this war?
As a correspondent and as a reporter, that's exactly how you feel. If something is happening, you want to go there.
Go.
Yeah, but it is not very clear where El Frente de Batalla is right now. I mean, I'm not sure if it's Tehran or if at some point it was in Israel or in both places. So it's the modern war that because of drones and because of the technology, the war is so expanded that it is incredibly difficult just to go to one place. The other thing is that maybe the common thread. I was thinking about Iraq, Paola, in 2003 when the U.S. says it was a lie that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and then they attack Iraq. The same way as President Trump said that there was an imminent threat to the U.S. by Iran, and we have no evidence of that. So the sense that war is a complete failure of politicians and diplomats to just simply to be able to talk. That's something always present, and that's why the feeling of hopelessness is always present, always present.
Yeah, I was really struck with some of Catalina's commentary, the way that she explained that fear, and I think what she said says a lot. That she said that as we were speaking to her that morning when she went out to report and talk to people, that she had never in all her years living there, she told us that she had never felt people as scared as she felt them that day. And I think, when we're always trying to kind of capture what's happening abroad, I think that's exactly what makes it so hard for Western media or for cable news in America to really accurately capture what's happening there. Because how do you get those voices to speak to you? And you have to be on the ground. And I thought that was just tremendous work that both of them are doing. But I think Catalina, to be there, she didn't think it's brave, but it's extremely brave for her to be doing that.
I agree with you. I think she's incredibly brave, and the people of Iran are muy valientes because look what's happening. The 47 years of dictatorship, and then they hoped that something was gonna change, and then suddenly the president of the United States says that he's going to destroy a civilization in one night, just one night. So where is the hope? So I do understand why fear is present. The possibility of regime change has completely disappeared in Iran. And I wonder, after 6-7 weeks of war, what do we have now? Gasoline we're paying much more. The Strait of Hormuz is completely controlled now by Iran. Iran still has nuclear material, that there's no possibility of regime change. So after 7 weeks, what do we have? Nothing. And I think, honestly, that Iran was underestimated, because for them just to resist is a victory. This morning, as I mentioned during the podcast, I was talking to our American ambassador, Paola, and he was telling me that what happened in Venezuela made a lot of damage to the United States, because Donald Trump and his administration, they thought that just by taking Nicolás Maduro, they could change the country. And they thought, okay, let's use the same Venezuelan formula to Iran, and then let's go to Cuba. Well, it doesn't work that way. And I agree with him.
And not only that, but I think what Yeganeh also explained is that initial and very palpable rage that Iranians were feeling on the ground while they were protesting after the massacre. That rage towards the regime seems to now be morphing into a very deep resentment towards the United States. And so for me, that initial hope, of people going to the streets, of people demanding change, has now, I think, turned into a very more complicated dynamic. And it also makes me think of, bringing us back to the United States, what all of this means in front of the midterms. Remember that in just a couple of weeks, just a couple of months, people are going to go vote. And this impending, overshadowing war will be reflected on the polls. And if you kind of zoom into the MAGA world, everyone is mad at Donald Trump, right? Even his biggest allies. You have Tucker Carlson, Candace Owen, Megyn Kelly, all these right-wing MAGA influencers that are now extremely, extremely opposed to this war. And so I think that resentment that they feel abroad is also being felt here within the MAGA world. And I guess the question is, typically a rational leader, right? One that kind of follows international norms, one that even looks at the polls, would act according to what the American population wants. But in this case, I think the only kind of formula to Trump is his recklessness, right? It's that we don't know what he will do tomorrow, right? It's that he no longer cares about his own MAGA polls. So I think that is kind of what scares me, that even him, kind of this like MAGA king, is no longer paying attention to what his own supporters want.
And we still have 3 more years of that. Let me just finish by saying that whenever, I think I've covered 6 or 7 wars, that I've seen the worst and the best of human beings during wartime. So hopefully we shouldn't be able to talk about this soon. I hope. That's my hope. Mi esperanza. Bye, Paola Ramos.
You're always more hopeful than me. Adios, papi.
The Moment is a production of Radio Ambulante Studios in partnership with iHeart's My Cultura podcast network. Our staff includes Daniel Alarcón, Lisa Cerda, and Miguel Santiago Colón, with help from Alison Brennan, Paola Leán, Diego Corso, Natalia Ramírez, and Elsa Liliana Ulloa. Sound mixing by Andres Aspiri. Theme song by Elias Gonzalez. The CEO of Radio Ambulante Studios is Carolina Guerrero. Executive producers at iHeart are Leo Gomez and Arlene Santana. Pablo Cabrera, Dylan Unger, and Mark Canton also serve as producers. Our hosts are Jorge Ramos and Paola Ramos. If you like this episode, please share the word. Recommend The Moment to anyone who might enjoy unpacking these complicated times with us. And if you like The Moment, pero también te gustan los podcasts en español, check out Radio Ambulante Studios. Our shows, Radio Ambulante, El Hilo, and Central, are really worth a listen. I'm Laura Rojas Aponte. Thanks for listening.